Hey, second graders, it's time for Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's magic. And we are in chapter 2. This is part 3. Remember, we're with the thought you setters, and these kids are like making up different things that they thought they heard their parents say. They're getting on their parents' nerves, too. But the thought you setitis continued all the rest of the week. By Friday, Mr. and Mrs. Burbank were so irritable that they didn't even want to come downstairs and eat breakfast with the thought you setters. They tried to solve the problem by not speaking to the children, but of course the telephone rang and Mrs. Burbank said to Allison, "Answer the phone." And Allison didn't move, and her father said, "Answer the phone." And Allison said, answer the phone. I thought you said the ham's got a bone." And Darcy said, "I thought you said the dancers are home." And Bard said, "I thought you said, the jam's all alone." It was the last straw. Mr. Burbank said, "This nonsense has got to stop now. I'm not going to eat another meal with the thought you saids." As soon as the children had left for school, and even before she washed the breakfast dishes, Mrs. Burbank decided that she must do something about the thought you setters. She poured herself another cup of coffee and sat down at the breakfast table and thought and thought. Oh boy, the dog came and sat beside her and gave her a small piece of ham and stroked his head and wondered what to do. She was going to call Mr. Burbank's mother when the telephone rang. Mrs. Burbank answered it. It is Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, and she wanted the children to come for tea. Mrs. Burbank said, "Oh, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, I am so delighted that you called. I was just sitting here at the breakfast table, wondering what in the world to do." And she told Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle about the thought you saids. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, "There is a regular epidemic of thought you saiditis all over. It is really a very harmless disease, but can be the most annoying to parents, especially when they're trying to hurry. I have suffered with it myself this past week. Put on your shoes is the thought you setter set on a fuse. Get me a tack, thought you said, butter a cracker." And on and on. Fortunately, the cure is very simple. I have a magic powder which you sprinkle in the children's ears tonight. It will make their hearing so keen that they'll be able to hear spiders stomping across the floor, leaves crashing on the ground, and flowers snapping open their petals, and fireflies striking the matches that light their lanterns. I must warn you that tomorrow the children are wearing the magic hearing powder. You mustn't pop corn, run the vacuum cleaner, or serve dry, crumbly breakfast foods. The noise would be too painful for them. I'll send the powder over when the children stop by after school. You might lend a little bit to Marilyn's mother. Goodbye and good luck." Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle hung up the phone. After school, the children came rushing in to deliver the package from Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle and to change her clothes. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's package contained a little box of white powder. Mrs. Burbank felt the powder and smelled it. It felt like talcum powder, and it smelled like ginger. She put it under a pile of clean handkerchiefs in her handkerchief box. That evening, after the children were in bed, she told Mr. Burbank about it. He thought the magic powder sounded wonderful and decided to try a little in his own ears. Mrs. Burbank went up and got a bottle, and Mr. Burbank put a pinch of it in his left ear. Immediately he shouted, "Turn off that terrible radio! It's killing me!" Mrs. Burbank rushed to turn off the radio. Mr. Burbank said, "It's thundering. We must be getting a storm." Mrs. Burbank listened. She couldn't hear any thunder. She opened the front door and went out and looked at the sky. It was clear dark blue and spangled with stars. The night was still quiet as a picture. Mr. Burbank shouted, "There's a storm getting closer. It's almost overhead now." Mrs. Burbank came in and closed the door. She said, "Bernard, Burbank, it's cold, clear, and perfectly peaceful tonight. There is no thunder." Mr. Burbank said, "Listen, don't you hear it? It's deafening. That's what it is, deafening." Mrs. Burbank listened very carefully. She heard a noise from the kitchen, a soft, very faint thumping noise. She went to investigate and found that old boy, the dog, lying under the kitchen table, scratching and thumping his elbow on the floor. She gave old boy a dog biscuit and put him out. Then she went back to the living room and asked Mr. Burbank if the storm had passed. He said, "Did you have a stamp on your feet did you have to stomp on your feet like that? You certainly must be getting rounder. You sound like a coal truck when you walk." Mrs. Burbank, who was very slight, looked down at her soft red slippers and said, "Bernard, I think you better wash that magic powder out of your ear because I'm going to go out right now and get some graham crackers and think of the torture that'll put you through if I drop a crumb." Mr. Burbank said, "Stop shouting." Mrs. Burbank said, "I'm whispering, dear." So Mr. Burbank went upstairs to wash out his ear. Then he snapped on the light in his bathroom. He flinched because it sounded like a pistol shot. When he turned on the faucet, it sounded like Niagara Falls. And when he accidentally brushed a hairpin off the windowsill, it sounded like a huge iron chain clashing to the tiled floor. Mr. Burbank filled the bathroom glass with warm water. He had decided that would be the best way to wash out the magic powder, and was just about to pour some in his ear when from behind the bathtub he heard the most awful screeching, whining sound. He straightened up, put down the glass, and peered over the bathtub. He didn't see anything. He bent over the basin again and picked up the glass. It was just about to pour the warm water in his ear when this horrible, terrible, screaming, squealing sound came again. This time right by his head. Mr. Burbank was so scared he dropped the glass, sipped the water, and banged his head on the faucet. He looked all around but couldn't see anything. The noise came again, this time a little fainter, and from behind the Venetian blind. He raised the blind and looked carefully out there. He couldn't see a thing. The terrible noise came again, this time by the mirror. Then Mr. Burbank saw what it was. It was a big mosquito. He grabbed a washcloth and, without thinking of the magic hearing, swatted the mosquito. The screams of agony that immediately filled the bathroom were horrible. Mr. Burbank hurriedly turned on the warm water and stuck his ear right under the faucet. Whew, what a relief! He picked up the dead mosquito by one leg and put it in the waste bin and then called Mrs. Burbank. "Hey, Mary, I'm all right now, but I think we'd better go easy on the magic powder in the children's ears. It's awfully strong." Mrs. Burbank said, "Perhaps you use too much. Here, I'll measure it out. I'll use a toothpick and I'll just put a grain or so in the right ear of each child." All right, so what do you think is going to happen in the next part of this chapter? What do you think this powder in their ears is going to do for the kids? Make a prediction and I'll see you next time.